And welcome to Talk of the Town. Yes, you're at the right place, but we had to play a very special song this evening. That is Hot Popcorn, right?
Buttered popcorn.
And I, of course, am Lisa Dascoli, the host of Talk of the Town, and with my wonderful co-host, Richard Skipper.
Hello, Lisa.
Hello, sweetheart.
It's National Popcorn Day.
That's why we had to play that. And we even are having some popcorn here at the studio. So I hope you're all celebrating with us and having some popcorn.
Well, the interesting that song was written in 1961, the year I was born, so it's 55 years ago.
Oh, my.
And it was written by Barry Gordy.
Really?
Is that funny?
I did not know that. So there you go. That was a different kind of song for him to. Yes, that's very, very interesting.
They don't write them like that
anymore. No, they do not. Well, what have you been up to, my friend? There are so many things happening in the world of cabaret and local theater.
This has been
a
big day. I don't know if anyway, you have to be under a rock if you're in the theater and you don't know that it was announced today that Bette Midler is returning to Broadway in her first musical on Broadway, excluding, of course, the cabaret type shows that she did, the reviews, like Clams on a Half Shell and those shows.
But when she was coming up and she was doing more of
but
that
she was in the original Fiddler on the Roof, which is now experiencing this incredible revival on Broadway with Danny Burston. But she's coming to Broadway next year, opening in March of 2017 as Dolly Gallagher-Levi in Hello, Dolly.
And that is an insurmountable, shoes to fill.
Well, as you know, and I'm writing a book about the legacy of Dolly, celebrating the people who have done Dolly and basically telling their stories. Yesterday, of course, was Martin Luther King Day, and there's a very interesting story when he was unfortunately assassinated. Pearl Bailey was actually starring in Dolly on Broadway at the time. And she had to make a decision very quickly as to whether or not they would do a show that night because he was killed shortly after 6 o'clock. And she made the decision that the audience needed to be entertained.
Yes.
And so they went on and they did the show that night. But interestingly enough, Hello, Dolly has only been revived on Broadway by Carol Channing and Pearl Bailey. And this will be the first time since its original Broadway run that another actress has come in to do the role.
Yes.
And you can read all about it on my website, callondolly.com.
Yes.
But the original Dollies, if I may go through them, were Carol Channing, followed by Ginger Rogers, followed by Martha Ray, and then Betty Grable, Phyllis Diller, Pearl Bailey, then Phyllis Diller, and then it ended with Ethel Merman on Broadway. And then, of course, it was made to motion pictures starring Barbra Streisand.
And I'll bet that most people do not know that these very headline actresses all did that role because everybody thinks Carol Channing.
But the interesting thing, David Merrick was a smart businessman in terms of bringing all of these actresses in to play the role. And each of them brought their own personality and their own style and those little nuances that made each of them who they were into the show. There were asides when Pearl Bailey did it to the audience, constantly throughout the show. But nowadays, when someone goes to replace someone in a Broadway show, rather than bringing their personality in, they're doing tracks where they are asked to basically repeat what the person did before them. And I think that is a horrendous thing that has happened to Broadway.
Well, I agree with you. But to my understanding, that is demanded, that you're to do that because that's what the audience is expecting. And it doesn't leave any room for creativity. It doesn't leave any room for bringing your own spin to a role. You're basically reiterating, and I agree with you. I would prefer
it's very interesting because when Pearl Bailey was doing the show, she received a special Tony Award for the role, and when she came in to do the show, when they gave her the special Tony Award, Carol Channing said, "Have you ever had a dress and you loan the dress to someone else, and they may have taken the hem up a little bit or shortened the sleeves a little bit or dropped the bodice or any of these things to make it their own. And that's exactly what Pearl Bailey did with it. But when you think about all of these great actresses, and there have been many, many more who have played the role around the world,
Yes.
and each of them have brought their own distinct style to it. So I cannot wait to see what Bette Midler is going to be doing with the show.
It definitely is going to be a worthwhile to go see.
And it's going to be directed by Jerry Zaks and produced by Scott Rudin. Okay. And it's time. I mean, unfortunately, when the 50th anniversary came, Jerry Herman wanted to have a 50th anniversary revival. And I don't know if you know this, but I threw a party for the original cast of Dolly at Sardi's. And it was very interesting when I put this together. I thought that I would get a lot of support from Actors Equity and the Actors Fund and Judansum, because they own the St. James Theater where Hello Dolly ran, and there was very little support for this. And we have to preserve and celebrate our history. Leroy Reams, who is a dear friend of mine, said he was talking about revisals. And he said, if you're going to make a red velvet cake, you and I both know what a red velvet cake looks like, and we know what it tastes like. But let's say that you come along and you say, I'm going to make a red velvet cake, but instead of this ingredient and this ingredient and this ingredient, I'm going to replace each of these ingredients with this ingredient, and this ingredient. He said it damn well better tastes better than the original. Otherwise, why bother?
Exactly.
And I'm excited to see what the creative team are going to do in terms of bringing the new Dolly to Broadway. But a lot of audiences they know what they're going to expect. You've got to see her come down those stairs in a red dress. Those are the things that are important to the production itself. And I hope that those things will be celebrated. And they did say in the press releases that I received today that they are going to pay a special homage to Gower Champion, what he brought to the role.
And I do hope so, because as you said, we do need to respect our theater history. We need to, let's face it, if the show hasn't been on Broadway in how many years?
Well, the last Broadway revival was 20 years ago.
Okay. That's a new generation of people who have not seen it, and it's worth seeing again.
Absolutely. But with any show, if you're going to name a show.
Present or past? Give me...
It doesn't matter. Just name a show that you've seen that you really loved.
Most recently, Something Rotten.
Something Rotten. Something Rotten is an incredible Broadway show. But imagine 25, 30 years from now that they want to do a revival of Something Rotten on Broadway.
Okay.
But the creative team that comes in decides that they can do better than the original. I find that hard to believe because I love this production so much.
Yes.
But imagine if they come along and they say, we feel that this could be better than the original for the following reasons. Well, that's not Something Rotten. Something Rotten was created. It was written by a certain team of people. Yes. And those people need to be celebrated. And those people need to be acknowledged in terms of the work that's going out there.
It's really funny you should say that, because I directed a production of Spamalot this past summer. And it was a wonderful production. I had a phenomenal cast. And one thing I said to my cast is, you better be on point, guys, because the people in the audience know these lines as well as you do.
Mm-hmm.
There's a certain... there's to that expectation to honor the things that are good about it. And I wasn't going to try to reinvent the wheel.
And you have to realize also, we know that audiences change.
Yes.
But when you watch a classic movie, that movie is set in a certain time period. And that movie, Gone with the Wind being a perfect example.
Yes.
There are certain people who are offended by some of the images that are in the film today, but that film depicted a particular time in history.
Absolutely.
And to try to monkey around with those things. And if you're going to do Annie Get Your Gun, for example, and you don't want to have the Indians depicted as they were depicted at that time. And I'm not saying that a lot of those depictions were politically correct, for lack of a better term or something, but that was a product of its time.
Yes.
And I feel that all of us, it can be a learning curve.
Right.
When I see a movie and I find an offensive, I was watching something the other night, and the character referred to as cleaning lady is a colored woman that comes in and cleans. And I had a knee-jerk reaction by even hearing that, because that's something we don't hear anymore.
Right.
But it gives you a time frame and the essence of that time in which it was written.
Mm-hmm.
So it's a good opportunity to explain to kids, what that time period was.
Yes.
It's very interesting because with the latest movie version of Annie, the guy who wrote the script for this said that he was in the theater, and when they sang, "We'd like to thank you, Herbert Hoover," he's thinking, these kids in the theater don't know who Herbert Hoover is. So he wanted to update it to our era. But my feeling is that these kids don't know who Herbert Hoover is. It's time to educate them as to who he was. You don't just erase it as if it didn't happen and try to update it for current audiences.
I absolutely agree with you. And if I also teach middle school as my day job. And if a kid doesn't understand a reference that I make, my answer is just very calmly, Google it.
Mm-hmm.
Who's Herbert Hoover? Well, Google it.
But, it's very interesting, and I think I've shared this with you before, but when I was starting out, I grew up in a small town in South Carolina, Conway, South Carolina, for those of you listening out there, which is the gateway to Myrtle Beach. I had a mentor named Florence Epps, Miss Epps, and we would have elocution lessons every Wednesday and Thursday afternoon in her little playhouse, which was behind her house. And we would sit down and we would be reading along, and she would stop me and she'd say, "Okay, Ricky, who is this person?" And if I didn't know, she would close the book and she would say, "Our class is over. When you come back, know who this person is."
Okay.
And I would go to the library and I would go through the catalogs and I would look at the index and I would get all the information that I could find on who these people were. So when I came to New York, I had a good working knowledge of who all the great entertainers were that went before me.
Yes.
She instilled in me, she said, every time you walk out on stage, you are carrying the mantle of every great artist that's gone before you. Mm-hmm. And it behooves you to celebrate them and to make them proud that this legacy is continuing. And it amazes me how many people are on Broadway now on either end of the footlights who don't know anything about Mary Martin or Robert Preston or Yul Brynner or Lorette Taylor. People just don't know who they are anymore. And in a world in which you've got all these search engines, there's no excuse for it.
I think that is because of something you had said earlier about a respect for the past and learning from it. What are you up to these days? What are you going to see? Who's
Well, tomorrow night, I'm having dinner with George Bettinger, who is a dear friend of mine. He has a wonderful radio program down in Florida called the Mom and Pop Shop. And he is actually here in New York. I couldn't be there tonight because obviously I'm with you.
Yes, thank you.
But he is being inducted tonight into the Friars. So he's in town, so we're going to get together to catch up. And I actually performed at his wedding. This is a very funny story, if I may share this.
Certainly.
But years ago, when I was performing as Carol Channing, I was at a show one night in the city, and he came up to me and he says, "I'm getting married, and I want you to sing at my wedding." And I said, "Sure, I'd love to sing at your wedding." And then nothing else was ever said about it. And I received an invitation in the mail. There was nothing about me performing at a wedding. There was nothing to say that I was going to be performing at the wedding. And obviously, if you're going to be singing at someone's wedding, you're going to discuss pricing and when you're going to go on and nothing. So I show up at the wedding. And as a guest, and as I walk in, Jamie DeRoy, who we both know, she met me and she said, "I'm thrilled that you're performing tonight." And I said, "Well, where do you get the idea that I'm performing?" And she said, "It's in the program." And he had a full page. I was appearing at the time in Atlantic City. And it said, direct from Atlantic City, Richard Skipper as Carol Channing for our evening entertainment.
Oh, dear.
And I went up to him and I said, George, I can't believe that you're doing this because I am not prepared. And he said, oh, I'm sure you'll figure something out. And at that time, this was it was the end of Carol's previous marriage to Charles Lowe, and there was a lot in the newspapers about it. So I got up, and in my Carol Channing voice, which I'm not going to do for you now, but I got up and I said, I'm sure you've all been reading about me in the papers. Well, tonight I'm incognito. And I did the entire evening just standing as myself doing this. So that's, I'm looking forward to spending some time with George Bettinger tomorrow night.
Well, kudos to you for figuring that one out. I never would have. I just had the opportunity to see a wonderful production. And for anybody who is in the Hackensack area, it's this weekend only because it was last weekend and now this weekend, The Normal Heart. And my friend Case Gaines, who has been on our show, he has directed this production along with Greg Leosi, and I really was quite blown away. And it was a phenomenal production, very touching, and still as important now in 2016 as it was when it came out back in the early 90s.
Well, for those who may be not aware
then it's a good lesson.
It's a great lesson. And I remember at the time my coming out was around the same time. I mean, I hate that phrase, but coming to the realization that I was a gay man was in the early 80s when the AIDS crisis was just happening. And I had just arrived in New York a few years prior to that. And I remember the ACT UP meetings. I remember Larry Kramer screaming in the streets. And I, even at that time, thought, well, this man shut up because he was just non-stopping in terms of his militantism. Is there such a word?
It is now.
Okay, it is. But he was so militant and he was so adamant in getting his word out. And it wasn't until years later when I've seen documentaries on him and I've read his writings and what a hero this man was. If people only had listened to him, there are so many other lives that I feel would have been saved. And I do believe, and you and I both know so many people that we had in common, but I do believe that we lost so many people because of the fear and ignorance that was out there. Because we didn't have the knowledge in terms of the inhibitors and the medication that was out there. And so people were grasping at straws. And then you've got someone like this, like Larry Kramer, out there screaming for people to wake up, and no one's listening to him. And that's what this is about. I mean, and I remember complacency equals death. It was on the subways. It was in posters. It was everywhere you went. But God bless him. He's in failing health, but he truly is a hero.
Well, anybody who is interested in some really quality theater, I really encourage you to go this week. I mean, there's so many things going on this weekend alone. I'm going to be running from show to show, and I'm very excited because also at the Bergdorf Center in Maplewood, another friend of our show, Michael Magenta, and the Ground Level Theater, he is doing another one of his original pieces, and it's called Quintet, and it's 5 individual pieces, 5 individual little plays is the way I like to phrase it.
Does he play all parts?
He does not play any of them. He is the director, and there's a wonderful cast of actors. Again, that's at the Bergdorf Center in Maplewood. And you know what's so nice about local theater, and nobody really seems to bring this up enough, is that the tickets are so reasonably priced. This is $20 for an evening of entertainment. Please tell me
seeing
where.
Broadway shows. Do you want to know what I heard yesterday? I saw online that tickets for Hamilton were available, and they were going anywhere from $856 to $1,400.
Oh, really?
I mean, who can afford, and who's going to pay, Lin-Manuel, I'm a huge fan of yours.
Absolutely.
But I can't afford that.
I can't either. And to those who can, I am impressed, and I think that's wonderful. And yes, go see live theater, but for the rest of us who cannot afford those kinds of Broadway prices, go to your local theater groups, and they are doing great work. Again, $20.
Carol Channing once said to me, she said, in order for a show to succeed, you need people from all walks of life.
Yes.
You need doctors and lawyers and house cleaners and janitors and custodians and teachers, all coming together in a collective. And that's the magic of theater.
Yes.
Because one thing that I say that we all have in common is we all have the same 24 hours.
Right.
What we do with that 24 hours is up to each of us individually.
Absolutely.
But as an audience sitting there and laughing and hearing the laughter around you, and I'm sure that you experience this with The Normal Heart, having experienced this on Broadway, where you hear the sobs around you.
Yes.
It's an amazing feeling to have that, and you don't get that sitting at home watching a television show.
No. And as an actor, I've experienced both. I've heard the people in the audience laugh, and I've heard the people in the audience cry, and both of those are exhilarating to me as the actor. But to sit there and watch this, and I know a lot of people will argue, well, I don't want to see anything that's sad. You know what, though? This reminded me of a time, and it brought back a lot of memories, and it was a good thing. It was a good thing to just remember. It was a good thing to experience. If you haven't left the theater and felt something, then the actors weren't doing their job. And I like
beyond the script. What made that production a wonderful experience for you?
I will say very honestly that the cast was excellent. They had me at hello, if you will. They truly did. I was with them through the entire story, through the entire journey, and it kept me engrossed in the entire. And I know the story of what happened in New York City during the early 90s. It was not a surprise to me. I already knew that story, but they kept it fresh and alive. So that's good theater. That is good theater. How do you feel about original theater? Because that's another thing that I'm very passionate about with local theaters, original pieces.
Well, it's always wonderful to give a great playwright. We talked about this a few weeks ago. It's always wonderful to give a new writer a chance for their material to be seen and heard on stage. And I love new theater, especially good theater.
Oh, yeah.
And I want to be entertained when I go to the theater.
Yes.
I am not interested in going for an evening, although, The Normal Heart is a very thought-provoking, heart-wrenching experience in the theater. It's a valuable experience in the theater. But I also want to go to the theater to escape.
Absolutely.
And that basically makes my theater-going decisions, it weighs heavily in that department. Because I truly want to escape from what's going on in my own life.
Oh, very much so. This weekend as well, January 22nd, 23rd, and 24th, Old Library Theater is doing their one-act festival in Fair Lawn. Now, that's an evening where people submit plays that they have written. I think it's usually no longer than 20 to 30 minutes. And I love that experience for several reasons. One, the writer gets to hear their words. The actor gets to create something pretty much without any sort of influence. And it's a true theater experience.
Well, you're very involved in the New Jersey theater scene.
Yes.
And there are a lot of theaters, as you and I both know.
Right.
How often do you see brand new works in New Jersey theaters?
I could get to see new works pretty much twice a month if I sought it out, if I had that kind of time. Truly, there's so many people that I've known, I've come in contact with, that they do one-act festivals or they do original works, and I'm very much an advocate of that because I think that that's an invaluable experience on so many ends. I got to do an original one-act. What was it? Wasn't last year? It was 2 years ago, and it was about a school shooting.
Wow!
It was about a mother whose son was killed in a school shooting, and the mother of the boy who did the shooting came to her to visit, and what an incredible experience. It really, it shook me. Shook me at first. It was a wonderful story, and this is an original playwright. This is somebody who is not quote unquote well known, but what extremely
I'll tell you
powerful
one
work.
of the issues that I find that is so disheartening in today's world of entertainment. It's being in the top 10 always. When a movie or when I was growing up, we had a local movie theater in our hometown, for example, and a movie got a chance to get legs, as they used to say. And nowadays, if it doesn't show up in the top 10, it gets yanked out of the movie
Killed.
theaters. And it's true of television shows.
Yes,
it's true
absolutely.
of theater. It's so expensive. How many shows open and close within a matter of days because it hasn't found its audience yet? And to mount a show, and then you've got in the theater especially, you've got all these snarky websites and people making snarky comments attacking each other. I mean, I heard snarky comments today about Bette Midler coming into Dolly. This is why it's so difficult for people to want to come to the theater, to be put under that kind of scrutiny constantly. And I want to say to all of you snarks out there, get up there and do it yourselves.
Isn't that what Ethel Merman said?
Yes.
If they were any better, they'd be up here
That's
doing
right.
it. But beyond that, I will say this, because I have had issue with the snarky comments and whatnot. And what I find is that anybody can be brave behind the screen of a computer. However, I've yet to see anybody engage in an intelligent debate face to face.
I agree with you.
Yes.
It's very interesting that people want to go in that realm. And as you know, it's not what I'm all about.
Neither am I. And that's why we are doing this show in this venue.
I guess that's why we're doing this and eating our popcorn here. But you give these people a chance. I look at so many shows that used to go on the road. And the other night, speaking of great, I went to see Tommy Tune last week at the Carlisle.
Oh, my.
If anyone out there, it's pricey, I'm going to let you know. But if you can get to the Carlisle before Friday night to see Tommy Tune, it's a masterclass in, as I wrote in my blog the other day, it reminded me of all those movies where you would go to a supper club and the person would come out and do this act, because he came out and he told these incredible stories about working with these great artists and everything. And it was just great to see him up there doing what he does so wonderfully. But he talked about my one and only. And my one and only was in Boston, and it was having a lot of problems. It's him and Twiggy. And they were on the cover of one of the New York magazine.
Okay.
And, and it had Tommy Tune and Twiggy in that famous pose of them in the tuxedos. And it mentioned, like they were free falling, like the show is going to bomb before it came to New York. And it was under such scrutiny when it came into New York, people were looking for it to fail.
Yeah.
And I don't get that. I don't understand critics who want to go to the theater who are hoping for something snarky so they can put it in their column the next day.
And I think that's sad. And to which end, I was actually taught in school that it takes 7 weeks for a show to find its audience and to start to build a momentum. 7 weeks. And not too many shows are given that luxury.
That's right.
These days. Because it's either you're in or you're out. There's that instant gratification. Bam. give it a minute. Let's develop some characters. Let's develop a storyline. Give it a second. I don't understand, but we are dedicated to being positive and embracing the artist.
I want to celebrate the artist. It's for every time an artist steps out on stage, every time a writer puts pen to paper, you were under the scrutiny of every single person who it comes to that. And so when you're beaten down so many times, there are very few people who can resist that and rise above it. And you just have to go out there, do the best work you can, and hope that everyone is going to like the show. Everyone's not going to like what you do.
No, they're not. Everybody's not going to like it. So you hope that you're back to do your best and, just try to be entertaining. Couple other shows that I do want to mention, because I do like to get the word out. And this is just a few of the shows that are going up and around in the immediate future.
Now, are these shows that you've seen already?
I have not. They have not opened yet. These are people in my circle who are doing shows, and I just want to get the word out because, again, there's so much wonderful entertainment out there at a reasonable price. There's nothing that you don't have to just go to the movies. Go support a local theater group and have a wonderful evening of live theater and do something different for a change. Hey, you know what? Maybe you'll actually talk to the person next to you afterwards. You might have a conversation.
Well, isn't that exciting?
That would be so lovely.
I love doing that. I will go into the theater and, I used to, when I was doing my Carol show years ago, I used to do a thing at the beginning of each of my performances where I would get the audience introducing each other like we do in church sometimes, with peace be with you, peace be with you.
Yes.
And Carol used to say, or I used to say in my show, isn't it amazing how many people go to the theater and never take the time to say hello, how are you, what's your name, what are you doing after the show? And you're sitting next to these people and you have no idea who you're sitting next to or whatever the other night.
And yet you're having an incredible experience, a visceral experience sitting next to these people.
I had a very interesting experience the other night, speaking of theater. I went to see Ed Asner's new play called A Man and His Prostate, which you can't imagine being a theater piece. And yet it was a very riveting piece. What was so wonderful, it was actually the playwright's story that he had written for another actor to tell this story about his experiences when he thought he had prostate cancer. But it's humorous. It was funny in terms of how he dealt with it. And one of the reviews that I read about Ed Asner said he was so wonderful at 86 years old that the audience thought that it was really his story. That's how he made it his own. But I'm sitting next to Tony Danza in the theater the other night.
Wow.
And I'm talking to Tony, and I asked him what was coming up and everything. And I asked him if he was coming to I'm not going to mention the venue because I don't want to give away any information in case they're listening.
Okay.
But he said, I'm the one they call when someone else is not available. And here is this man who has had this incredible television career, incredible theater career.
Yes.
And he's feeling the same thing that you and I feel about, being called and everything. And with Tommy Tune, interestingly enough, he is pitch hitting for Cheetah Rivera, who was supposed to be doing the show. She fell. She broke her pelvis. So, Cheetah, if you're listening, please get better real soon.
Honey.
But he read in the paper that she had fallen, and he called his manager and said, call and see if they're looking for someone to go in.
Wow.
And it's just grabbing those opportunities. And all of us as artists need to take advantage of that.
Always. Yeah. I actually had a couple Facebook messages, people requesting, talking about something very similar to that. So that's sort of a validation for me. I think we will in the near future. Another show coming up. 2 shows coming up. I'll go in order because I'm one of those people that has to do things in order. February 5th through the 21st. Now, I just want to point out that all of these shows are always Friday, Saturday, Sunday, and that's because most of the actors are doing this for no pay.
And the love of it.
Yes, and I've always said that is the true meaning of the word amateur, is amateur, for the love of. So I very proudly stand there and say, yes, I do this just simply because I love the opportunity to do it. But February 5th through 21st at Playhouse 22, and that's in East Brunswick, New Jersey. They are mounting the 25th annual Putnam County Spelling Bee, which is hilarious. A very, very funny show. Now, that's a musical, okay? $22 to go see a musical, folks. You cannot beat that.
Okay, Lisa, I want you to spell onomatopoeia right now.
I'm sure some of my friends would have a real kick out of that one. And again, please check the website, and all of our shows are archived. So if you need to go back and listen again for the names of the theaters.
Are these listed on the Broadway box band?
They will be. We'll just have to
we should start doing that. That would be a great thing to do.
I think we should. Thank you. Thank you, Richard. We're going to do that. And February 19th through the 28th at West Milford Players, they're doing Moonstruck. Now, we also had Petra San Marco on our show, and we talked about her stage version of Moonstruck. $15 for tickets.
Now, has this been done as a stage play before?
Nope. She is spearheading this.
Oh, wow.
Yes.
Wow. Is it a musical or a comedy?
No, it's a comedy. There's no music in it. And what's nice about it is a portion of the proceeds will go to the Mental Health Association of Passaic County.
That's good.
So there's a lot of goodwill on all ends of this. And a lot more to come. A group in North Brunswick is doing Music Man in March, and Scarlet Pimpernel will be also in March. We'll talk about that in the future. So get out there. Go see local theater.
Live theater. And I'd like to recommend also a couple of things.
Please.
In Cabaret, our friend Gretchen Reinhagen.
Who I love.
Who we love, on February 3rd. She's going to be at the Metropolitan Room on 22nd Street. This past year, she's done, over the course of her cabaret career, these incredible shows that have won awards and received.
And I just have to jump in because this is, if I don't say this, I'll burst. Gretchen has the most amazing voice, and her shows are just a joy to sit and watch.
So this show that she's doing is called, she called all these shows Reinhagen Redux, where she went back and for one night only, she revisited these entire shows that she had done before. But this is now called Redux Recap. And she's bringing all these things together. And unfortunately, her father was just diagnosed with cancer. So all of the proceeds are going to go in terms of the money towards his medical expenses. So it's a great cause. If anyone's listening and you'd like more information, please contact me, Richard at richardskipper.com, and I'll be able to get back to you with all the details. But it will be the 3rd at 7 o'clock. And another show that I want to recommend is Marta Sanders, who is a tour guide in New York. She was in the original Best Little Whorehouse in Texas on Broadway, and then she left the show and toured all over the world doing her own nightclub act. And she's got a show called Follow Me about her experiences traveling the world. And she's a phenomenal talent. And
when is that show? Tell me again.
She's doing 2 performances. She's doing the 6th, which is a Saturday night, and the 7th at 7 o'clock. And then on Sunday afternoon, she's doing a brunch show. And both of these are at the Laurie Beachman Theater at the West Bank Cafe.
Yes. There's so many wonderful productions up and around the area that there's absolutely no reason to not experience them. And I think I always walk away from any live performance a little bit enriched. I've either experienced something, I can't speak highly enough of I think it's a great thing to do.
Well, what happens with me is as an artist, sometimes we all seem to lose touch with our core and
that's what I'm trying
why we are in this business to begin with. And when I go and I see a great artist, it inspires me to get out there and to work harder at what I do.
Yes.
And if I see a great artist, to write about them, to, as you and I are doing right now, to talk about them and to spread the word about it. Don't go just and see a show and say, well, I've done it, and move on. Go out and talk about it. Write about it on Facebook. You don't have to be a critic in the New York Times to be able to post your opinions of a show. Be kind. Be kind.
Oh, yes.
Be kind.
I mean, to talk about a show is not to criticize a show, but to actually, as I said earlier, start a conversation. What did you like about it? How did that make you feel? Music is an extraordinary thing that makes us feel. It either brings back memories, and actually I can get a little clinical here. They say Alzheimer's patients can remember songs from their youth.
No, that's true. It's absolutely true.
And when Gabrielle Giffords, the senator, was shot, first thing they did was teach her to sing before they taught her to speak, because music lives in no specific part of our brain. So music is an extremely important thing to remember to bring into our lives.
And it's a shame, this is a whole other topic and a whole other show, but it's amazing to me in our country and in our culture that the first thing that gets cut is funding for the arts. And it's very interesting. A few years ago, and I may have talked about this on a previous show, but I got involved with the theater company, a high school theater company in Weston, Connecticut. Now, Weston is a very affluent area, but when they needed new seats for their stadium. People were throwing money at the school. And yet when they wanted to get new seats for the auditorium, they had to do bake sales and cake sales and sell magazine subscriptions and do everything in their power to raise the money. That money was not just handed over to them.
Yes.
And it amazes me how in this culture we spend so much money on other aspects, and yet kids in school don't have. Harry Collegian, Carol Channing's husband, who passed away a few years ago, said to me, kids are not going to know the difference between a xylophone and a microphone if they're not exposed to it.
You're absolutely right.
And we need to expose these kids to the theater. I love the fact that Hamilton, that they are treating kids to the theater. And they're learning something while they're there. Yep.
I absolutely agree, because there's also a lot of ways of learning. So the theater provides a lot of benefits as well as entertainment. It really is such an important part of our culture, our lives. And again, support the local theaters. They're the ones who are out there doing it with their whole hearts. Really, the shoestring budgets, and the hope and the prayer that we get an audience. So anything that I can do for you guys.
And tomorrow's stars are in these theaters.
Actually, I believe it was the Cranford Theater, which is a local theater out this way. That is where the young lady who was just recently on the televised version of The Wiz started out. Charisse
Williams.
Thank you. I was going to say that. So, anything else going on, my friend?
Well, I want to remind everyone that's listening that I do have a website, richardskipper.com, and I write a blog called Richard Skipper Celebrates, celebrating people in the arts. Many of the people that we've talked about tonight are mentioned in our blogs. And Bette Midler, if you're listening, please, I want to interview you. I am so thrilled that she's going to be coming back to Broadway in this show. This is something that Jerry Herman has wanted for a long, long time, and she's perfect. You need a bigger-than-life personality, and she's certainly got it.
Absolutely. There's actually one other event, because we're talking a lot about live theater, but there's also the visual arts, and a lovely woman, her name is Celeste Dubois, and she's having an art expo this week at I'm going to try to say this right, the Jadeite Galleries, and it's in Hell's Kitchen. I don't have any further information, but it's Jadite Galleries. And again, I love to bring my kids to art museums and just let them walk around and experience and look at things. And even if they go, "That's really weird, Mom." Okay, that's fine. You think it's weird, but that's fine.
I just got this great tweet from Robbie Rozelle, who works for Playbill.com.
Yes.
And he wrote, "Remember when all you nerds were all Star Wars, blah, blah, blah? This is our Star Wars," referring to Bette Midler and Dolly.
You know what? I love the way that's perfect. Thank you, Robbie. Absolutely perfect. Thank you so much. That is exactly how to phrase it. And of course, then there's the Academy Awards, which when that's on,
and that's
our Super Bowl.
And I'd like to say happy birthday to one of my favorite bitches in the entire world, and that's Allison Arngrim, Little Nellie Olson.
Oh my!
We should have her on the show. She's a good friend of mine.
Okay.
I'm sure she would love to come on the show.
Well, you arrange it, and I will be very happy.
She has a great show called Little Bitch on the Prairie.
You arrange that, my friend, and that's fine with me. You know that. All right, so next month when we gather again, we're going to have some some wonderful things to talk about, one of which is your show coming up.
My birthday, and I'm going to be performing with Peggy Eason, the Chocolate Diva. We're doing it for the last...
I think we should have Peggy back on the show.
Well, maybe we'll bring her in next week or next month. This will be my 16th year to do this. Mm-hmm. I perform at the Helen Hayes Atrium in West Haverstraw. Mm-hmm. It's a free concert. Mm-hmm. And they have shows every Sunday afternoon free for the patients. And they open the doors to the general public.
These are the things that I love to bring up because I think that people should know. Free concerts for the patients. How wonderful and warm is that? And you are, of course, a magnificent performer. I have seen you perform. So.
Well, I try. God knows I do.
So that's something to look forward to. We'll talk more about it next month. We'll have a little birthday party for you as well.
Oh, that sounds great. Strawberry shortcake.
Okay, you got it, my friend. In the meantime, you have been listening to Talk of the Town on BroadbandBoxOffice.com. My name is Lisa Dascoli. You can always reach us on Facebook, and please leave your comments or any suggestions for upcoming shows. We'd love to hear from you. Richard Skipper, thank you so much, my friend.
Thanks for the popcorn. Patrick, we have to thank Patrick for the popcorn.
Absolutely. Now, our next show is February 8th, so please listen, tell your friends, and until that time, I look forward to speaking to you again.